Welcome to Soul of Persia, where the oldest stories on Earth still speak to the human heart. Every civilization has a moment that changes everything. A single choice, a single victory, sometimes a single spark. But before that spark could illuminate the world, another story had to reach its end. A story of grief, vengeance, and the rise of a king whose greatest triumph would never be won with a sword. Siamak's death was more than the fall of a prince. It was as though the world itself had entered a season of mourning. For an entire year, Tahmuras, the first king of mankind, grieved for the son he had lost. The mountains remained silent. The royal court knew no celebration. Even the passing seasons seemed to move more slowly beneath the weight of his sorrow. Yet destiny is rarely finished when sorrow believes it has spoken the final word. Before Siamak fell in battle, he had left behind a son. His name was Hushang, a young prince whose heart carried both the pain of loss and the courage to face it. One day, Hushang stood before his grandfather. There was sadness in his eyes, but something stronger burned behind it. Resolve. He bowed his head and quietly said, "Give me your blessing. Let me gather an army and avenge my father's blood." For a long moment, Tahmuras said nothing. He simply looked at the young man before him. Perhaps he saw Siamak once again. Perhaps he saw the future waiting to be born. At last, he nodded. No speech, no ceremony, only a silent blessing. And with that quiet gesture, history began to move once more. Word spread across the kingdom. Warriors answered Hushang's call. But this was no ordinary army. Brave men marched beneath his banner. Radiant spirits stood beside them. Lions walked without fear. Leopards moved like shadows across the mountain paths. It was as though every noble force in creation had chosen the same side. This army sought no empire. It marched for justice. The wind swept across the peaks. The valleys fell silent. Even the mountains seemed to be waiting. Then, weapons crashed together. The silence shattered beneath the clash of battle. Dust rose into the sky. The earth trembled beneath charging feet. The battle was fierce, but this was more than a war between two armies. It was hope standing against despair, justice against cruelty, light against darkness. He fought neither for glory nor for conquest. Every swing of his sword carried the memory of his father. Every step carried the promise he had made. The struggle was long, the cost was great, but in the end, justice prevailed. Ahriman's army was broken, the Lord of Darkness was captured, and Hushang fulfilled his oath. He struck off Ahriman's head and avenged the blood of Siamak. For the first time in many months, the land could breathe again. Peace returned, not because evil had disappeared forever, but because courage had refused to surrender. Tahmuras remained among his people for a time. His greatest gift had never been his crown. It was the wisdom he shared. He taught his people how to live together, how to honor the gifts of the earth, how to build a life guided by wisdom rather than fear. But even the first king could not escape time. After 30 years upon the throne, Tahmuras reached the end of his journey. The man who had worn the world's first crown, who had built its first throne, and who had led humanity's first kingdom, closed his eyes for the final time. Yet some lives do not end. They become stories, and stories, when remembered, refuse to die. Perhaps that is why Ferdowsi leaves us with a quiet reminder. This world is, after all, a tale. The crown now passed to Hushang, the young prince who had once marched into battle for his father, now carried the responsibility of an entire world. Standing before his people, he lifted his eyes toward heaven and declared, "I rule the 7 climes by the grace of the Almighty, and I shall govern with justice and generosity." They were not words spoken for applause. They became the foundation of his reign. Justice spread across the land. Fear slowly gave way to peace. Villages flourished once more, and hope, so long forgotten, found its way back into human hearts. Yet Hushang believed that a king's greatest victories were not won in war. They were built in times of peace. He turned his attention toward the mountains, toward the silent stones that had guarded their secrets since the beginning of time. From within those stones, he drew iron. From iron came axes, saws, and the first tools that allowed humanity not merely to survive, but to build. He guided rivers across thirsty lands. Water reached fields that had never known its touch. The barren earth awakened. Seeds broke through the soil. Green fields spread across the valleys. People learned to earn their bread from the land with their own hands and to weave simple clothing from the gifts of nature. Little by little, the world was changing, not through the roar of conquest, but through the quiet patience of wisdom. Yet destiny still held one final gift in reserve. Hidden deep within the mountains, an ancient secret was waiting. A secret that would forever change the story of humankind. Sometimes the greatest turning points in history are not born on the battlefield. Sometimes they begin in the silence of a mountain. And sometimes the destiny of an entire civilization changes with nothing more than a single spark. One day, Hushang journeyed into the mountains with his companions. The sky stretched endlessly above them, clear and blue. A gentle breeze carried the scent of wild herbs across the hillsides. The mountains stood in solemn silence, as though they had guarded an ancient secret since the dawn of creation. No one knew that before the sun would set, the world itself would be forever changed. Then, the silence broke. From between the dark rocks emerged a gigantic serpent. Its immense body glided over the stones, while its eyes burned like glowing embers. It was so vast and terrifying that it seemed less like a living creature and more like a fragment of darkness given life. The king's companions froze where they stood, but Hushang never stepped back. His gaze remained fixed upon the beast. He bent down, picked up a stone, and for a single heartbeat, the whole world seemed to fall silent. Then, with all his strength, he hurled the stone toward the serpent. The serpent leaped away with astonishing speed. The stone missed its mark and crashed against a great slab of iron hidden within the mountainside. For one breath, everything was still. Then, a tiny flash of light appeared. Another spark followed, and suddenly, a brilliant flame burst forth from the stone. The first fire, the first light. It was as though the earth itself had finally entrusted one of its oldest secrets to humankind. No one spoke. The dancing flame reflected in every pair of eyes. Its warmth pushed back the mountain's cold embrace. Its light drove away the darkness, and within that single flame, a new future began to reveal itself. Hushang stood quietly before the fire. He saw more than light. He saw hope. He saw tomorrow. He saw the beginning of a new age. Then, with gratitude in his voice, he said, "This fire is a gift from God to humankind." From that day forward, fire became far more than a source of warmth. It illuminated the night. It protected families from the bitter cold. It transformed food. It shaped tools. And it became a symbol of the divine wisdom hidden within creation itself. That evening, the people gathered around the flame. They celebrated with joyful hearts as its light danced beneath the darkening sky. Years passed. Generations came and went. Yet the memory of that extraordinary night never faded. Every year, as evening approached on that sacred day, the people of Iran gathered once again around great bonfires. They celebrated the victory of light over darkness and gave thanks for the heavenly gift that had changed human life forever. In time, that ancient tradition became known as the Sadeh festival, a celebration honoring the discovery of fire and one of the oldest living festivals in Persian culture. But Hushang's legacy did not end with fire. He domesticated cattle and sheep. He taught his people how to work alongside them, turning strength into harvest and labor into abundance. The fields grew greener, the harvests became richer, and life flourished with every passing season. Under Hushang's rule, people learned that true prosperity is not built through conquest, but through wisdom. To him, the greatness of a king was never measured by the size of his armies. It was measured by the well-being of his people. Perhaps that is why his name has never been forgotten. The years passed quietly. At last, the time came for Hushang too to leave the world. But there are lives that never truly end. They live on in the light they leave behind. Every time a flame rises against the darkness, every time a farmer plants the season's first seed, every time human hands use wisdom to make the world a little better than before, the spirit of Hushang lives on. Ferdowsi does not remember him simply as a righteous king. He remembers him as the ruler who guided humanity across an invisible bridge. From survival to civilization, from fear to hope, from darkness to light. Sometimes a single spark does far more than ignite a stone. Sometimes it lights the path of an entire civilization. If you enjoyed this journey into one of Persia's oldest legends, please take a moment to like this video. Subscribe to Soul of Persia and join us on this journey through history, legend, and wisdom. Now, we'd love to hear from you. What do you believe was Hushang's greatest legacy? His justice, his innovations, his gift of agriculture, or the discovery of fire? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd be honored to continue this conversation with you. In our next episode, we will meet a king whose enemies were neither men nor beasts, but demons themselves. This is the story of Tahmuras, the ruler who subdued the forces of darkness and drew from them a knowledge that would forever shape the course of civilization. Until then, farewell, and remember, every legend Ferdowsi tells is more than a story of the past. It is a light that still guides us, even after 1,000 years.